Estella sat in the armchair she occupied every night in the dark living room of her small apartment, the same one she shared with her son Robert. The clock on the wall marked each second with painful precision, reminding her of the passing time, relentless, as she felt the weight of years in her frail body. Her eyes, now tired, wandered around the room, but her mind was far away, trapped in the shadows of a past she guarded with the care of a mother trying to protect her child from a devastating truth. She looked at her trembling hands, whose protruding veins seemed to whisper stories of a long-lost youth. A deep sigh escaped her lips. "I shouldn't have let things get to this point," she muttered to herself, her voice weak, almost as if she were talking to a ghost. Robert entered the room, interrupting her thoughts. He noticed his mother's distant expression, something that had been becoming more common in recent months. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Estella quickly disguised it, putting on a fragile smile. "I'm fine, dear. Just thinking about things from the past," she replied, trying to brush away the worry from Robert's face. He approached, sitting beside her, holding one of his mother's hands between his own. "You seem so distant lately, is it because of your health?" he asked, his voice laden with an anguish he tried to hide. Estella squeezed his hand with what little strength she still had. "My health isn't what it used to be, that's true. But it's not just that, Robert. There are things you don't know, things I've kept hidden for so long, things that, if I could go back in time, maybe I'd do differently," she said, her eyes brimming with tears she refused to let fall. Robert furrowed his brow, feeling his heart race. "What things, Mom? What are you trying to tell me?" he insisted, his tone more urgent. Estella looked away, unable to face him. How could she tell the truth now? How could she reveal the secret she had kept for 45 years, the secret about the father Robert never knew? A man she loved for a brief moment, but whose dark and dangerous world forced her to distance herself, without ever telling him she was pregnant. I need you to trust me, Robert. I haven't always made the best decisions, but everything I did was to protect you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. She knew she was on the edge of a precipice, and that any misplaced word could ruin everything she had built with so much sacrifice. Robert, even more confused, held his mother's face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "Mom, I've always trusted you. But tell me what's going on. What did you do to protect me?" Estella felt the tears finally escape, running down her wrinkled cheeks. She closed her eyes, as if trying to see Robert's face made everything harder. "There's a secret, Robert, a secret about your father. He never knew about you." Robert felt the ground crumble beneath his feet. "My father? What are you saying? You always told me he died before I was born." "I lied," she confessed, the word coming out like a poison she was finally forcing herself to expel. "I lied to protect you. I was so afraid of what he might do, afraid of how his life could destroy yours." Robert recoiled, trying to process the words that seemed to cut through his chest like sharp blades. He looked at his mother, searching for some explanation that would make sense amidst the chaos his mind was trying to organize. But all he found were the desperate eyes of a woman who seemed burdened with regrets and pain. The light rain was incessantly hitting the windows of the apartment, echoing the torment unfolding inside Estella. She watched Robert, his face aged beyond his 45 years, tired and dejected, as he struggled to maintain his composure. The bills were scattered across the kitchen table, a sea of papers that only increased the feeling of suffocation. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mom," Robert murmured, his voice choked with despair. He rubbed his temples with trembling hands, as if trying to ward off the constant headache that tormented him. "I've tried everything, but I can't see a way out. We're on the verge of losing the house. I feel like I'm failing you." Estella felt her heart tighten, each beat hurting more than the last. She saw the burden Robert carried, and knew that, in part, that weight was hers. The guilt she had kept secret for so long now weighed like an anchor, pulling her into the depths of regret. "Robert, my son, you've done everything you could," she said, her voice softly trembling, but full of love. She moved closer to him, trying to offer comfort, but feeling that every word was insufficient. "No, Mom," he replied, abruptly getting up from the table and starting to pace around the small kitchen. "I failed. I couldn't protect what we have, and now, everything is falling apart. I don't know if I can keep fighting anymore." Estella felt tears welling up in her eyes. She wanted to scream, wanted to tell him that none of this was his fault, that the real culprit was the man who had ruined their lives without ever even knowing of Robert's existence. But the words got stuck in her throat, as if something inside her still refused to let the secret out. "Robert, you're not alone, we'll find a way out," she tried, but her words seemed empty even to herself. She knew that, without help, the fate approaching was relentless. The house, which was all they had, would soon be just a memory. "But how, Mom? How are we going to manage?" Robert asked, his tired eyes meeting hers with a silent plea. "I've been to all the banks, I've begged, I've done the impossible. And now I don't know what else to do." The pain in his voice was a blow to Estella. She felt as if each of his words was a knife sinking deeper and deeper into her chest. She knew she was running out of time, that the truth needed to be told, but the fear of the consequences paralyzed her. What if telling the truth destroyed Robert's life even more? What if everything ended up even worse? But the guilt was eating her up inside, like a slow and silent disease. The love she felt for Robert was what kept her alive, but it was also what was killing her little by little, because she knew she had the answer to save her son, but hesitated to give it. Robert sat down again, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed. Maybe it would be easier to give up," he whispered, almost inaudible, but enough for Estella to hear. These words pierced Estella's heart. "No, Robert, please don't say that," she pleaded, tears now freely running down her face. "You're everything to me, and I can't lose you." "Then tell me what to do, Mom," he begged, raising his gaze to her with eyes full of pain. "I'd do anything to save you from this suffering." The pressure of her secret began to overflow, the decades of silence seeming increasingly unbearable. Estella felt cornered, suffocated by guilt and the unconditional love she felt for Robert. She knew she couldn't go on like this, but what to say? How to explain that the answer to Robert's problems was in the hands of a dangerous man, a man she had always feared? The room fell silent, except for the sound of rain outside, as if even time was in tune with the suffering unfolding between mother and son. Estella knew she was reaching her limit, that the secret she kept was about to destroy everything, and yet, she couldn't find the words to confess. Not while she saw the desperation in Robert's eyes, not while he continued to fight against the world without knowing the truth that could save him or destroy him forever. Estella found herself in front of the large iron gate guarding the imposing mansion. It was a cold and grandiose construction, reflecting the dark nature of its owner. She pulled her coat tighter around her frail body, as if she could protect herself from the whirlwind of emotions that awaited her inside. Her trembling hands hesitated before pressing the intercom, but she knew there was no turning back now. The gate opened slowly, revealing a long path leading to the entrance of the mansion. Each step she took seemed to echo the distance between the past she had left behind and the present that now forced her to confront it. Estella felt her heart beating so hard she feared it might escape from her chest at any moment. Upon reaching the door, she was greeted by a man with a stern expression, dressed in black, who guided her to a luxurious but devoid of warmth living room. Everything around seemed made to impress and intimidate, and Estella felt small, insignificant, as if she were invading a world she should never have returned to. She waited there, alone, the silence of the room broken only by the distant sound of classical music playing somewhere in the mansion. Estella wondered if she had made an irreparable mistake by coming here, but the image of Robert, exhausted and desperate, propelled her to move forward. She needed to do this for him, no matter how much it cost her soul. The door opened, and John entered the room. He was older, but still radiated the same aura of power that had both attracted and frightened her in the past. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on her with an almost cruel curiosity. The silence between them was heavy, loaded with a history that didn't need to be spoken, because it was still alive in both of them. "Estella," he said, in a tone that mixed surprise and distrust, "after so many years, what brings you to me?" Estella felt her throat tighten, but she knew she couldn't hesitate. I wouldn't have come if it wasn't absolutely necessary, John, she replied, keeping her voice steady, despite the vulnerability she felt in his presence. John raised an eyebrow, slowly approaching. Necessary? You disappeared from my life without a trace, Estella. And now, suddenly, you show up at my house. What's so necessary that made you come back to me? She hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words, but knew there was no way to soften the impact of what she was about to say. It's about Robert. The name of the son he never knew he had made John stop. His gaze became even more penetrating, and he gave a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Robert? And what, exactly, does this Robert have to do with me? Estella felt a chill run down her spine. His smile was more of a warning than a gesture of courtesy. He's your son, John. The silence that followed was almost palpable. John kept looking at her, as if trying to decipher whether this was some kind of cruel joke or an inconvenient truth. Finally, he laughed, a low sound without joy. My son? You come to me after more than 4 decades to tell me I have a son? I never wanted to involve you, but he needs help, she said, her voice breaking at the end. Estella knew she was begging, something she hated to do, but Robert was all that mattered now. John moved closer to her, so close that Estella could smell his cologne, mixed with something dangerous that always emanated from him. And why should I believe you, Estella? After all these years, after everything you did to disappear? Estella faced him, her eyes full of a deep sadness that he couldn't ignore. Because, as much as I tried, I couldn't erase you from my life. Robert is proof of that. He's your son, John, and I'm desperate. John was silent for a long time, his eyes fixed on hers, evaluating, judging. Finally, he took a step back, as if he needed space to process the information. So, I'm a father, he muttered, more to himself than to her. And what exactly do you expect me to do now, Estella? Do you want me to be a father after all these years? Or are you here for another reason? Estella felt the weight of the truth crushing her shoulders. He's about to lose everything, John. I just wanted you to help him. I know it's a lot to ask, but I have no one else to turn to. John looked at her, his face a mask of impassivity. You've always been brave, Estella. Brave or foolish, I'm not sure which now. I'll think about what you've told me. And with that, he left the room, leaving Estella alone, wrapped in a feeling of emptiness. She felt that by opening that door to the past, she had released something she could never control. And now, all that remained was to wait and fear what would come next. Estella was lying in her bed, her fragile body covered by a thin blanket that did little to warm her. Her breathing was labored, each sigh costing her an immense effort. She looked at the ceiling, where shadows danced under the faint light coming through the window. She felt the overwhelming presence of time, each passing second becoming a cruel reminder that her health was fading, as was her willpower. The image of Robert wouldn't leave her mind. She saw him as a boy, running through the house with messy hair, full of life and hope. Now, he was an exhausted man, defeated by hardships, but still the boy she wanted to protect at all costs. But with each passing day, it became harder to ignore the truth. Time was running out, and the choice she needed to make was consuming her. Estella closed her eyes, trying to push away the weight of the dilemma that tortured her, but the memories came back with force. She remembered John's face, the coldness in his gaze, the way he dealt with the revelation. I'm a father, he had said, almost like an unexpected discovery, but not as a responsibility. John wasn't a man who cared about blood ties, he cared about power, about control. And the thought of exposing Robert to his world was something that made Estella's heart clench with pain. I can't do this to him, Estella murmured to herself, feeling a tear trickle from the corner of her eye. But the alternative, the image of Robert losing everything, falling into an abyss of despair from which he might not be able to escape, was equally terrifying. There was a soft knock on the door, and then Robert entered the room. He was visibly tired, deep circles under his eyes marking the face that was once so vibrant. Seeing her there, so fragile, his face contorted in a mixture of concern and pain. "Mom, how are you feeling today?" Estella forced a smile, although she knew she wasn't fooling anyone. "I'm fine, dear, just a little tired." Robert approached, pulling up a chair to sit next to the bed. He took her hand, and Estella felt the roughness of his fingers, a consequence of so much hard work. "Mom, I'm so sorry for all this. I should be able to help you, but I'm failing." "Don't say that, my son," said Estella, squeezing his hand with what little strength she had left. "You've done everything you could. I just wish I could do more for you." Robert shook his head, his eyes watery. "You've already done so much. I just wish things were different, that we had another chance." Estella felt the lump in her throat grow, guilt seeping into every word he said. She wanted to tell the truth, confess the secret she had kept for so long, but fear held her back. "Robert, sometimes life gives us difficult choices, and no matter what we do, it seems there's always a price to pay." "I know, Mom," Robert replied, looking at the floor, his voice low. "But I feel like I'm losing everything, and I don't know how to deal with it." Estella wanted to scream, to say that there was a way out, that maybe John could help, but what would that cost Robert? He was so vulnerable, so lost, and the idea of involving him in that world of shadows and dangers was unbearable. She felt the crushing weight of the choice, a weight that was destroying her health, her peace of mind, and that threatened to destroy her own son. "Robert, I want you to know that everything I did was to protect you," she said, her voice choked. "Even if it meant carrying heavy secrets for so many years." Robert raised his head, looking at her with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Estella closed her eyes, feeling the tears flowing freely now. She was on the verge of a decision that could change everything, but that could also destroy what she loved most. And as she struggled to find the words, time seemed to stop, leaving her alone with the unbearable pain of knowing that whatever her choice, suffering would not be avoided, only transformed. Estella took a deep breath, feeling the weight of decades of silence crushing her chest. The words she had kept for so long burned in her throat, begging to be said, but fear held her back like invisible chains. Robert was sitting in front of her, his eyes full of exhaustion and worry, unaware that his life was about to change forever. "Robert," she began, her voice weak, almost a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I've hidden from you your entire life." Robert frowned, confused. "Mom, what are you talking about? What could be so important right now?" Estella felt her hands trembling, and the cold of the room seemed to penetrate to her bones. She knew there was no turning back. "The man you think is your father, he's not your biological father." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert sat motionless, as if her words hadn't fully penetrated his consciousness. "What are you saying?" he asked, incredulous, almost in a whisper. Estella looked at her son, her eyes full of infinite sadness. "I was 27 when I met a man. John. He wasn't a good man, Robert. He was dangerous, involved in things I should never have gotten close to. But I fell in love with him in a way I can't explain. It was quick, intense, and soon after we separated, I found out I was pregnant with you." Robert stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair. "You're telling me that my father, the man I knew, isn't my real father? That you've lied to me all these years?" His voice was loaded with anger and pain, each word a cutting blade. "I was scared, Robert," Estella replied, trying to hold back tears. "John wasn't a man you could trifle with. He never knew about you, and I did everything I could to protect you. I just wanted you to have a normal life, away from that world." Robert started pacing back and forth, his hands shaking. "Why did you never tell me? I deserved to know. You let me grow up not knowing who I really am." "I was afraid," she repeated, her voice choked. "Afraid that he might hurt you, that he'd pull you into that world. And then, time kept passing, and I I didn't know how to tell you. Every time I looked at you, I saw the boy I wanted to protect, not the man who needed to know the truth. Robert stopped and stared at her, his eyes red. And now? Why now? Why are you telling me this now, after all this time? Estella took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the revelation dragging her into an abyss. Because you're losing everything, Robert. I see how much you're suffering, and it's killing me inside. John. He's the only person who can help you now. But I don't know if it's right. I don't know if you should look for him. Robert shook his head, his voice trembling. I don't even know what to think, Mom. You've thrown all this at me, and now you expect me to go after this man? A man who never knew I existed? How am I going to face this? Estella tried to reach out to him, but Robert backed away, pain and distress evident in his eyes. I know I hurt you, my son, she said, her voice breaking. And I know you may never forgive me. But I'm trying to give you a chance, one last chance to get out of this situation. And, as much as I hid this from you, the love I feel for you has always been true. Robert looked at her, conflicting emotions battling inside him. He wanted to scream, to run away, but at the same time, he was trapped by the desperate need to save himself and the mother he now saw in a new light. I need to think, he muttered, turning his back and leaving the room, leaving Estella alone with the crushing silence and the guilt that consumed her. She heard the door close and finally allowed herself to cry freely. Tears streamed down her face, and the pain in her chest was so intense she could barely breathe. She knew that by revealing the truth, she had opened a wound that might never heal. And as she drowned in her suffering, she could only hope that Robert would find the strength to make the right decision, even if it meant walking away from her forever. Robert, with a heavy heart and a mind in turmoil, couldn't shake his mother's words from his head. The revelation had left him stunned, and every time he thought about the man who could be his father, a mix of anger and despair overtook him. He needed answers. He needed to confront John. On the day of the meeting, Robert found himself in front of an imposing mansion, with high gates and cameras watching every move. The place was as intimidating as the man he was about to meet. He pressed the intercom button, and a harsh voice answered on the other end. Who are you and what do you want? My name is Robert. Tell John that Estella sent me, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady, even though he was trembling inside. After a brief silence, the gates opened, and Robert was led down a winding path to the main door. Each step was heavier than the last, and he felt as if he was walking towards an inevitable fate. When he entered, he was greeted by a tall, imposing man with a cold, calculating gaze. John had graying hair and the posture of someone accustomed to being in control. They stared at each other for a long moment before John finally broke the silence. So, you're Estella's son? John said, with a voice as sharp as a blade. Robert clenched his fists, trying to stay calm. I am. And you're my father. The words came out harsher than he intended, loaded with years of anger and resentment. John narrowed his eyes, studying the young man in front of him. I didn't know of your existence until now. If I had known, things would have been different. Different how? You would have pushed me away, like you've pushed so many others out of your life? Robert couldn't hold back the acidity in his voice. What he wanted wasn't just money, but also answers, maybe even a connection he knew was impossible. John stepped forward, approaching Robert. You think you know what I am, but you have no idea what I sacrificed, what I did to get here. And now you show up, after all these years, wanting, what exactly? Money? A father? The word father came out with disdain. Robert stared at him, feeling a mix of fear and hatred. I didn't want any of this, I never asked for anything. But now, I need help. I'm on the brink of losing everything. My mother, she didn't want you to know, but I have no other choice. John observed him for a moment, the silence heavy between them. And you think I'm just going to give up what I've built to help a stranger? Because, in the end, that's what you are to me, a stranger. Robert felt the ground open up beneath his feet, but he kept his head up. I know I'm a stranger to you, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm your son. And despite everything, I thought that, maybe, there was something more to you than the man everyone fears. Something human. John remained silent, his eyes piercing Robert's. He could see the pain, the despair, but also the strength of the young man in front of him. Something within him wavered, a small crack in the armor he had built over the years. You're more like me than you think, he said, almost in a whisper, before turning his back and walking towards the window. Robert stood still, waiting, his heart pounding in his chest. The silence seemed endless until John finally spoke again, without turning around. I can help you, Robert. But don't think this changes anything between us. I'm not the man you want me to be. I never was, and I never will be. Robert took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. He knew this was the only help he would receive. I understand, he replied, his voice firm but with undeniable sadness. I'm not asking for a father. Just for a chance. John turned around again, his face an impenetrable mask. Consider this a debt I'm paying. Don't expect anything beyond that. He made a gesture with his hand, and one of his henchmen entered the room, handing an envelope to Robert. Robert took the envelope, knowing that inside was the temporary solution to his problems. But as he left, he couldn't help but wonder if this help would really solve anything, or if it would only sink him deeper into an abyss he was just beginning to understand. As Robert left the mansion, he felt a strange sense of emptiness. He had gotten what he came for, but at what cost? And as he walked to the car, a solitary tear ran down his face, for deep down he knew that, although he had found his father, he was more alone than ever. Stella lay in her bed, her body frail and exhausted. Each breath was an effort, and the pain radiating from her bones seemed to increase every day. She knew time was running out. She also knew that Robert's meeting with John could change everything, for better or for worse. When Robert entered the room, she sensed him before she saw him. There was something different about him, something she couldn't immediately identify, but it left her uneasy. He approached the bed, trying to smile, but failing miserably. The weight of what had happened was clearly etched on his face. Mom. Robert began, his voice choked with fatigue and doubt. Stella turned her head slowly to look at him, her eyes clouded with illness and worry. You found him, didn't you? Robert nodded, sitting down beside her, taking her cold, bony hand in his. Yes, I found him. He agreed to help us. Stella closed her eyes, a mix of relief and fear washing over her. And what did he say? How was he? Robert hesitated, the words heavy on his tongue. He's not what I expected, Mom. He agreed to help, but made it clear that this doesn't change anything. He can't be my father. He's only doing this because of a debt. Stella opened her eyes, the pain and sadness in her expression almost unbearable. I feared it would be like this. John has always been a complicated man, involved in things I should never have gotten close to. But he agreed, and that's more than I could have hoped for. Robert looked at his mother, the anguish clear in his eyes. But at what cost, Mom? He gave me money, yes, but now I feel trapped. How can I accept help from a man like him? How can I live with this, knowing what he's done, what he represents? Stella squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. Robert, I know this is hard, harder than anything you've ever faced. But I did what I did to protect you, to ensure you had a chance, even if that chance came from a source I feared. I never wanted you to carry this burden, but now that it's on your shoulders, all I can ask is that you be stronger than I was. Robert lowered his head, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. I don't know if I can, Mom. I don't know if I'm strong enough to deal with this. He's a dangerous man, someone who has done terrible things, and now I'm tied to him in a way I never wanted to be. Stella sighed, feeling the weight of guilt crush her even more. I know, my son. I know. But you are stronger than you think. You have a goodness in you that not even he can erase. Use that, Robert. Use it to do what is right, even if the path is dark. Robert looked up, seeing the tears in his mother's eyes. And what is right, Mom? I don't know what's right anymore. Stella looked at him, her eyes fixed on his, as if trying to pass on all the wisdom and love she had left. What is right is to live with a clear conscience, even when the world around you is stained. What is right is to remember who you are, regardless of who your father is. Robert felt a lump in his throat, the internal conflict tearing him apart. He knew he would have to make difficult decisions in the coming days, decisions that could define who he would become. And, looking at his mother, he realized that, despite everything, he still had the choice to be the man she had raised him to be. I'll try, Mom. I'll try to do what's right, even if I don't know what that means now, he promised, holding her hand tighter. Stella smiled, a weak and pained smile, but sincere. That's all I ask, my dear. That you try. Silence fell over them, heavy, but also filled with a strange peace. They knew the days ahead would be difficult, that Robert's decisions could lead to unexpected consequences. But, for a brief moment, as Stella caressed her son's hand, there was an unspoken understanding between them. An understanding that, despite everything, love and morality still had a place in this world so marked by suffering. The day was gloomy, the gray sky reflecting the weight Robert carried in his chest. He walked slowly down the hallway of the house, each step echoing like a reminder of the emptiness that now filled his life. The loss of Stella was recent, and the pain was sharp, like an open wound he didn't know how to close. Sitting on the sofa in the living room, he held the letter his mother had left. Her already weakened handwriting filled the paper with words he hadn't yet read. He felt like he was on the edge of a precipice, afraid that the contents of that letter would push him over the edge. With trembling hands, he finally opened the envelope and began to read. My dear Robert. If you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer by your side. I know the last few weeks have been difficult and that you carry the weight of choices I made long ago. But there are things you still don't know, secrets I kept to protect you, and now it's time to reveal them. John is not just the dangerous man you met. He was the love of my life. When we were young, life took us down different paths I never wanted for you. But there was a time, before everything fell apart, when we dreamed together, when we were happy, and you were the fruit of that love. When I discovered I was pregnant, I knew I had to protect you at any cost. I knew John was a complicated man, involved in things that could hurt you, and that's why I never revealed the truth to you. But there was more. I knew John was capable of terrible things, but I also knew that, deep down, he still loved me. That's why, when I was diagnosed, I went back to him. I knew I didn't have much time, and that, if something happened to me, he would be your only hope. You may find it hard to believe, but even now, after everything, I believe he still cares for you, in his own way. He agreed to help you because I asked, because he knew he couldn't deny me this last request. But John's help doesn't come without a price. He will want something in return, and that's what I fear. I want you to be strong, my son, stronger than I was. I want you to use what he gave you to do good, to distance yourself from the shadows he lives in. And, above all, I want you to forgive. Forgive me, forgive him, and forgive yourself. Life is full of difficult choices, and I made many of the wrong ones. But if there is any good that can come from all this, it's that you have the chance to do differently, to live a life free from the secrets and lies I carried. I love you, my dear, more than words can express. Be brave, and remember that, even in the darkest moments, there is always a light, even if it's small, that guides us out of the darkness. With all my love. Mom. Robert felt tears stream down his face as Stella's words sank into his soul. The letter was not just a confession, it was a testament of love, a final attempt by his mother to guide him even beyond death. The shock of the revelations mixed with the sadness and anger he still felt, but at the same time, a strange peace began to form within him. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. The choices he would have to make still weighed heavily on him, but now, with Steela's words in his mind, he felt a new determination. There was much to resolve, many mistakes to correct, but somehow, he knew that, with his mother's strength by his side, he could face whatever came his way. Robert closed the letter carefully, holding it against his chest. He knew the journey was just beginning, but for the first time in a long time, he felt there was a light, even if faint, ahead. And with that, he stood up, ready to face the future, with the memory of Steela as his guide and the promise that he would do everything he could to honor the sacrifice she had made for him.